the recording again and admit some guests.
See if anyone comes.
There are people out there. They're showing up.
We've got people joining. Hi, everyone. We've got 2 minutes before we officially start. Wow. Sorry, I clicked on something.
You have even Bostonians coming. Sophie, you don't need to let people in. That's Quinn's job. Unless you want
okay. Well, if you call me the host.
Oh, that's the Secretaries.
Ron, how nice to see you. There's someone I know.
There you go.
Yes, I just started chatting to someone earlier who I haven't talked to in 10 years. It's very nice, this meeting.
That's very lovely to hear.
Got another minute for everyone joining. Usual rules, if you're, please do leave your video on and feel free to kind of nod enthusiastically and use the little clapping hands and things like that. And mute your video if you're not talking. Not mute your audio, I mean. Too many little things flashing on the screen. I'm meant to be all tech savvy, aren't I? Okay, it's now officially the time for the meeting, 5:45 my time. Going to Quinn, are you still sharing the, oh no, okay.
I turned it.
Right, okay, no, let's just do this. Right, so welcome to the book chat session. My name is Sophie Brockmann and I'm very pleased to introduce Nancy Seasholes, who's a historian.
Seasholes.
Seasholes. Oh, sorry, Seasholes. Sorry, looking at too many things at all. Terribly sorry. And so Nancy is a historian of Boston, and she's published widely on the history of the city and especially geographical aspects of it. So today we're going to use her latest publication, an edited volume, an atlas of the history of Boston, as a jumping off point for Nancy to introduce the book and its maps. And hopefully in the very short session that we have, we'll also have a little bit of time for a short discussion. Please post your comments in the box on the side about the book, questions for Nancy, and perhaps also some general questions about the relationship between writing and doing history of maps, atlases, and history. So over to Nancy.
Thank you. Let's see if this works. Ha, there we are. So, can you all, I hope you all can see this. The Atlas of Boston History is an historical atlas of Boston. It traces Boston history from the last of the ice ages to the present through maps that were drafted especially for it by a team of cartographers, not generally historical maps. The atlas plates were written by 35 different people, most of them historians who work on Boston. So this is the, why is this not going ahead? Oh, why is my PowerPoint not working? And I'm going on to the next slide. Sophie, I'm pressing enter the way I normally do and it's not working.
Can you see a little arrow somewhere that you can click on?
I normally just press the enter button. Where is there an arrow? No, I don't.
At the bottom of your slide, so just move your cursor down, there you go, over to the left,
Oh,
there you go.
To the right, okay, there. Thank you. This is the first plate in the atlas, It's the one about Boston at the end of the Ice Age. Boston is right here. The map shows that Boston is in a geological formation known as the Boston Basin with two different types of bedrock. This is a photo of the Boston Basin on which we have superimposed what would have been the depth of the ice in that last ice age. And this is the last plate in the atlas, based on the 2010 US Census, which was the last one we had available to us. Each dot represents 50 people. The blue are whites, the yellow are African Americans, green are Hispanics, and the purple are Asians. Oh, sorry, I'm so used to pressing enter. There we go. This is another plate that we have of Boston in a specific year. We have a number of these plates throughout the atlas. In the one I just showed you, we generally show something about the composition of Boston in that year. Here it shows that the major group is still US-born whites, but that the Irish, shown here not surprisingly in green, are becoming increasingly important in 1855. Boston was one of the East Coast cities to which the Irish just poured into after 1845, fleeing the potato famine in Ireland. On the map here, the data were collected by ward. Each one of these graphs represents the composition of the population of a ward. The size of the graphs are the relative populations of the wards. Our plates about Boston in a specific year generally include a graph of Boston's population in relation to other major US cities. Here, Boston's population is in black. So you can see in 1850, it was the fourth largest city in the US after New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. And then these plates generally include what we call an architectural sidebar about the dominant architectural style of the time. This map points out a very important feature of the atlas, and that is that the shoreline of all of our maps is accurate for the date of that map. This is not the present shoreline of Boston. This is the 1855 shoreline of Boston in dark green, plotted on a present map of Boston in light green. The difference between the two is the filling, or the land making as I call it, that's been done to create the present land of Boston. It was filling in all the tidal flats that surrounded the original Boston Peninsula and the other parts of Boston. So we were always looking for maps that our cartographers could use to recreate these historical shorelines. In this case, let me get down to this arrow again. This shoreline is heavily based on this 1852 map of Boston by Henry McIntyre. The issue of land making in Boston is actually my own area of expertise. We do have several plates about it. This one shows the amount of land added to the Boston Peninsula and the other parts of Boston between 1828 and 1880. The different colors just show the different reasons for which the land was made. It was actually when I was working on this book about land making that precipitated the atlas. I kept wishing when I was working on this book that I had one place I could go to for maps of, let's say, the sewerage system or the railroads or population figures. So I became interested in an atlas, an historical atlas of Boston. And once I finished my book on land making and a companion book, I began to work on the atlas. That was in 2007. It took 12 years to get it all done. So the atlas does have maps that show the development of the infrastructure. This is one that shows the water system and the sewerage system up to 1906. But we found other interesting things to map. This one shows the movement of cultural institutions, museums, libraries, historical societies, in relation to where their clients were living, basically. So the ones founded in the late 18th century were located here because that was at the time the fashionable residential area of Boston. When that became the business district, then the fashionable residential area moved in the beginning of the 19th century to the area near the Boston Common. So the cultural institutions moved with them too, shown here in blue. When this became the business district after the Civil War, then the newly fashionable residential area was in the newly filled Back Bay, and many of the cultural institutions moved, shown here in red, to the Back Bay area. And then finally, at the turn of the 20th century, this area, which we call the Fenway, was filled and recently filled and developed, and many cultural institutions moved there. Well, Sophie asked a lot of interesting questions. One of them was, do historical atlases tell history differently from other histories? Or when we're mapping up the past from the present, do we alter it? In other words, would this map have been understandable to Bostonians in 1915, or have we imposed our own ideas on it? All interesting questions, but unfortunately, not time to discuss them in 5 minutes. So that's as much as I have to say about the atlas. Now let's have some questions.
Amazing. I was just going to say we're running out of time.
Yes, we have.
And I wanted to say for everyone, I'm pasting the website of the book into the chat. So there's a couple of plates on there, and it's really interesting. There's more information about the book, and I would encourage everyone to go see it. So we've got a question. Yes, especially I think about the shorelines. How reliable are these historical maps? I mean, where the historical maps that you might have worked with, maybe they drew on old or perhaps not that reliable data themselves, the map makers. So they might not have been that accurate. That's a question from the audience. How do you use these sources to make accurate?
That's a very good question, and I must say I spent years on it. So one of the sources that I found the most reliable were U.S. Coast and Geodetic charts, now put out by NOAA. I went to a lot of trouble to get these to find accurate maps, and it wasn't easy. But so heavily based on the Coast and Geodetic charts or on cartographers whom I relied on or whom I knew were accurate, but it was difficult.
Thank you. So that was a question from Ian Byrne, and I've got a question from Eric Losang that, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, that also relates to one of the questions that I think I asked Nancy in our private chat, which is the relationship between these new thematic maps made by cartographers for this atlas and historical maps. So if you go on the website, you can see that in some images, I believe, you've actually used historic maps and overlaid them with more recent data. And what were your thoughts in terms of including historic maps alongside modern thematic ones in terms of making it a historical book?
It's too bad I don't have them to show, but the two instances in which we used historical maps as the base maps for our discussions about Boston in a particular year were instances in which there were fairly good historical maps, and we were able to pick out those things that we wanted to show. There's one for Boston in 1743 that actually showed where all of the settlement was. It showed public buildings, it showed military installations, it showed industries, and we highlighted those in color. The other one we used was one in 1800 that was done by quite a good cartographer, Osgood Carleton. And again, this one we emphasized particular things, the African-American settlement, new building, the elite district, but based on a great deal of very detailed research by the author. But we were able to pick them out, and we just thought that those historical maps, because they were fairly accurate, or they showed the information we wanted, were worth using.
That's amazing. I sort of had perhaps one last question from me. We have 3 minutes. If you have other questions, please keep posting them. in terms of the audience of this book, I can see lots of different people being interested in this. People who are interested in the city of Boston, historians of cartography, but perhaps also people who just teach American history, because I see in this, you know, a model for involving maps and geography more broadly in general historical teaching. What were your thoughts in terms of what audience are you addressing, or how are you addressing different audiences?
That's another wonderful question. We tried to make it as broad as possible. So it is supposed to appeal to people who are just interested in Boston history. It's possible to start at plate 1 and read all the way through it and get a sense of Boston history, but it's really also intended as a reference work. And I know lots of teachers that use it. I know lots of courses in which it's being used, and it's meant to be used by professionals too. As I said, I wanted a source of some of these data, and it can be used that way also. So I would say the language level is probably, high school, somewhere in there. We tried to keep it fairly simple, but we meant it to be used by many different people, many different groups.
That's wonderful. Does anyone have any other questions? I'm just very conscious that we were told to keep exactly to time. But of course, if anyone has more questions for Nancy, you can create your own Zoom room, I believe. And there's the hallway breakout room. So if you are not going into the next session, you can go into the hallway, and perhaps Nancy could join that and answer any further questions. But for now, please join me in thanking Nancy so much for this interesting contribution, and go and look at the website and look at the atlas and buy it for your teaching.
Thanks, Sophie.
All right, I'm going to end this meeting.
I hadn't paid attention to the hallway. I'll see if I can get there. I don't know.
I should, or one of our amazing student secretaries who are much better might be able to paste the meeting, the hallway. Here it is.
I think I've got the instructions somewhere. I've got a lot of them.
I've got it. I'm going to paste it here before I leave. That is the hallway, and ISHMap chat is the password for that. And then there are 2 other sessions starting now. Session 3. And 4, and you've got the spreadsheet with the passwords.
Let me see if I can find it.
This is the password for the first one, and password for the second one. All right, so you've got the hallway and the different passwords and the other sessions, and I'm going to end this meeting now. Good to see